Hello everyone and welcome back to the FPL Phillips YouTube channel, and it seems as good as time as any to talk about the defenders of FPL. With Gabriel benched for the first 2 game weeks, and despite Arteta saying he's going to play a lot of games this season and he won't be sold, it doesn't fill me with confidence at all and I'm looking to sell. There might be some of you also watching with John Stones or Reece James still in your side, so overall we need to look at some defender picks to go for alongside Chilwell and Estupinan in our teams. Whether that just be a one defender to make up the rest of the back 3, or maybe even a rotation pairing to go for together, we're going to cover that all in today's video. Make sure to leave a comment down below with your own FPL questions and queries that you have at the moment. I do try to respond to every single comment and get back to you with my views and thoughts. But if you want to be in early for the next video to have the best chance of getting your comment responded to, make sure to hit that notification bell down below the video, and also leave me a thumbs up on it as well, and subscribe whilst you're here too, to make us try and hit 7,000 subscribers. That would mean a great deal if you would choose to help support the channel. It's completely free, of course, to do so. If you want some one-to-one chat with me, you can, of course, consider joining the members club too by hitting the join button that's down below. But without any further ado, let's get into talking some FPL. So the first thing we of course need to consider when looking for a defender to go ahead and replace Gabriel is which teams have the best fixtures that we even want to target in the first place for the best chance of getting not only clean sheets but maybe some attacking returns as well. And what I've used to do this is actually the Fantasy Football Fix fixture ticker, and I've just used the defensive fixture difficulty taken from that. It splits it into attacking and defensive fixture difficulty, and so looking at the defensive fixture difficulty I think is the main thing with defenders, although you could look at the attacking for defenders who do have very high attacking threat. Overall, I think in the majority of cases, this is the graphic that's going to be most important. Some teams towards the top are the ones that are immediately catching my eye, the ones contained in that kind of green outline that I've added on here. So Brentford right at the top, Newcastle in second, Chelsea in third, and then Aston Villa in fourth. All have some very nice and very cheap and budget-friendly defensive options you can go for as well. And then as it goes a bit further down, it kind of begins to tail off in terms of options. I'm not really looking to invest in the Everton defence right now. We've got Liverpool in there, again, not looking to go for any of their back line. Manchester United, I think if they hit form sometime soon, then maybe again Luke Shaw could be nice. Aaron Wan-Bissaka, if it turns out he's the long-term starting right back, again, another 4.5 million option who could become decent. But it's Spurs who are a bit further down that do really catch my eye, because there's one asset that we're going to get into in just a moment from there who looks a very nice pick. We've then got Bournemouth, and then it's Man City. So although Man City do have a plethora of really nice defensive options, that's kind of the problem with them, is that they have so many picks you can go for, and whether it be Vardiol, Diaz, maybe Akanji or Ake, no matter who you go for, I think there's always a slight rotation risk. Right now, maybe that's less so. With John Stones out for the foreseeable future, I think you could well go for a Man City defender and have a decent investment option for a few weeks. And they do have some pretty nice fixtures, especially over the next 5 game weeks or so. I think what's bringing them down in these rankings is that in Game Week 8 and Game Week 10, they face Arsenal and Man United away, which are pretty difficult fixtures on paper to keep a clean sheet. They also face Brighton in Game Week 9, who could do some damage at the Etihad. So over the next 5, Man City look really good. So if you're historically a manager who goes and plays a wildcard around the Game Week 8 mark, which is a very common time to do so and often works out as a really strong strategy, then definitely don't write off a Man City defender. I'm just not going to cover them in this video because, to be honest, I don't have a clue who's going to be the most nailed, other than probably Diaz, and then everyone else apart from that, maybe Vardiol. But I can't recommend anyone in good faith and say that I wouldn't just be playing Pep Roulette and hoping that they start every week and kind of betting my chances on it and not having a nailed starting defender, which I think is pretty important when you're considering we're having a 3 at the back system where the defence isn't that strong on the bench in terms of the options there. So Man City are a team I'm going to personally sway away from. I think if you do go for one, Diaz, as mentioned, is probably the most nailed, or maybe Vardiol at 5.0 would probably be my favourite 5.0 mil option alongside Akanji. But yeah, those are the options from the citizens that I would probably consider. If you're a bit more of a risk-taking manager, then maybe you could go for them, and they of course do have a high upside, but personally, just not going to be looking there for the time being. And then if we move 2 slots further down, we've got Arsenal in there as well. So, of course, we've got some assets from there. We need to consider some direct replacements for Gabriel, if you like, who we'll touch on in just a moment. But the fixtures for Arsenal don't look the absolute best. Same with Crystal Palace, who I also considered maybe putting some options from in here. I own Johnston as my goalkeeper at the moment, but I'd be willing to maybe, if the fixtures were better, double up with someone like an Anderson at 4.5 million. But for now, I think the fixtures are just putting me off Crystal Palace, so they're not going to be included in here either. But we've got some teams selected and mentioned who are the ones that we're going to be targeting. The top four especially, then we've got Spurs, and then we've got Arsenal as well. So let's get into things and break down the individual options. And the team who were top of that fixture ticker then were, of course, Brentford, who we're going to take a look at in terms of their back four and the different options. There is one standout, and there is a few others who are probably overlooked and ones that aren't being targeted quite as much. I personally already own one of these defenders, but Brentford have had a really strong start to the season, so I definitely consider investing in their defence if you're looking for someone to replace Gabriel, or indeed if you still own a Stones or a James and are just looking for a defensive pick to go for right now. And Henry is the one that I do own, but I think Pinnock and Hickey of the Brentford backline also present some really nice options. So they're in the first three columns over to the left. I've put Collins in as well, but to be honest, just even a slim glance at the data can kind of tell you what you need to know and that there are better options in the backline to target. And the reason I wanted to compare not just Henry and Pinnock, who are probably the two most favourites, but also Hickey, is that there's a very interesting statistic from last season, is that only Zinchenko in the Premier League, out of defenders, was substituted more times. And the trend seems to have continued into this season, is that Hickey is substituted around the 70-minute mark, where it could be very advantageous to have a defender who's in that kind of position, because the attacking threat, to be honest, it's there, but it's not absolutely huge with these kind of players. So if you have a defender who's subbed around the 70-minute mark, you're not really missing out on much attacking threat going forward. What you're more likely to benefit from is actually your defender having their clean sheet banked and then going off and then their team conceding afterwards, where actually they're going to still get the clean sheet points, but all the defenders left on the pitch aren't going to. So not only with Hickey, Henry is substituted relatively often as well, at least that was the case last year. But that's why I've kind of put Hickey in, is that his expected FPL points in the second row down have actually been better than Henry's per 90 so far this season, as I mentioned in every video basically. It's a very small sample size over the first two games, so we do have to take this, of course, with a pinch of salt. But he's also had higher XG. His XA is looking relatively nice as well, although not up there with Pinnock and Henry on 0.36 and 0.26 per 90 apiece. He's not been involved in a big chance like Pinnock and Henry have, but his expected points are not far behind at all. 9.5 compared to Henry's 9.9 and Pinnock's 9.6 over the next 3 game weeks. So Hickey's in there. Whether the Brentford defender spot would be a position where you want to go differential is one that's perhaps up for debate. But if you're looking to go a little bit away from the crowd and Henry does become a popular option and you want to go for Hickey or you want to go for Pinnock, I think there's definitely potential to go for a different one. Maybe watch some of the Brentford highlights, have a look at the games and see what you make out for yourself on the eye test. But I think either of these 3 options over on the left could present really, really good value. And I just thought it was interesting to bring up the fact about substitutions and that we could see some clean sheets that the rest of the backline don't get, but players like Hickey or maybe Henry, if he's subbed off too, do end up getting as a benefit over the other players. And next up, here's the only other defence where we're going to be considering the entire backline. I promise you won't have to look at tables for the rest of this video. It's going to be down to single players or just comparisons between 2 from here on out. But Newcastle are another team where there are quite a few strong options across the backline, especially last season. We saw Trippier, of course, be a massive force in terms of FPL. Fabian Schär as well, and we've got some different price points too. So Trippier being the most expensive, up at 6.5, Schär at 5.0, and then we've got Botman and Burn at 4.5 apiece. And so which one of these assets do you go for? I think there's a pretty quick conclusion that you should come to here, really, is that the green all the way down the left-hand side indicates that Botman is by far the best option. Really. Trippier and Schär are these more expensive price points. Schär, I think, is one who is more likely to come good this season. We haven't seen Trippier attacking as much. One of their games has been against Manchester City, and that's one thing that we definitely need to consider with these statistics, is that not only is this a small sample size, but it's a small sample size where 90 of the 180 minutes have been played against Manchester City. So the stats aren't going to look quite as good on paper. And of course, historically, Fabian Schär had great XG last season. Trippier had great expected assists last season. They were both phenomenal FPL assets to own. But personally, I really like the value in Botman, and although we might not need the funds drastically right now, I think 4.5 4.5 is definitely the best value of the bunch in here. 3.5 points per 90 with 4.1 expected FPL points per 90 so far. He's had some XG in there, he's registered some expected assist data as well, been involved in a big chance, and although his expected points are lower than Share and Trippier, presumably FPL Review is basing some of that on last season's data, which I've alluded to, I think the Botman at 4.5 is probably the one to go for, and he's the one that I'm going to be including in our rotation planners later on in the video. So then, next up in that list were, of course, Chelsea, and there's two real options to consider here, and one 0.5 cheaper than the other, who could present probably the best budget option in FPL, maybe of the entire season, and that is Malo Gusto, who's of course in the side now due to that Reece James injury. The severity and the timeline of which is not entirely set in stone, and we're not going to know exactly when Reece James is back. Even when he is, he might well just get injured the first game back again and be out for the next couple of months. So I think either way, Gusto presents a really nice option who, if necessary, you can go ahead and bench later on. And in terms of the data, again, it's a very small sample size. Gusto's only been in the Premier League for this one game he played against West Ham, so it's important not to read too much into the statistics, I guess, with this, and more go off something like the eye test. And I think that Gusto at the right wing-back position looks fantastic, playing even kind of tucking in when he's doing so. I think you basically go for him over a centre-back any day in terms of attacking threat, and he is going to get forward more and maybe be involved in more chances. I mean, that's not what the data would suggest so far, but again, this is only taken from one game for Gusto, and it was a game where Chelsea did struggle away at West Ham. So I think Colwill is a pretty fine option indeed, 4.5 million for definitely a more minutes assured player in the side. For Gusto of 4.0 million, that 0.5 can make the difference. And for example, in my team at the moment, if I downgrade Gabriel to Gusto, it saves me $1 million. I've then got 0.5 in the bank. I can afford to upgrade João Pedro to Jackson, and I can make those kind of jumps where it's more than $1 million that you might be able to do if you downgrade your Gabriel or whoever defender it ends up being to Gusto. That 0.5 could be the difference between getting in the asset you want to in your midfield or in your attack, or not doing so. So I think that's the situation where I'd consider going for Gusto over Colwill, is that they're pretty neck and neck. It's quite hard to split them. We've not really seen a lot either, but it looks like Gusto is going to be playing unless they change system to a back four where someone like a Dizazi or a Chalobah can come in and play at that position. I think that Gusto's relatively nailed in that side for the time being whilst James is out. So I quite like the look of Gusto. I might just use Colwill in the rotation planners just because he's the more assured and I suppose more sensible, less risky option. But I think that's the case where if you have the financial difficulty of not being able to go for Colwill and you need that extra 0.5 to go for a different attacker, if you're using 2 free transfers this week, for example, then Gusto could be the man for you. And I think if you're going Aston Villa, there's only really one man for you who's now looking a lot more nailed at that kind of right-back position than he did when Mings wasn't injured, due to the fact that Concert, who's playing centre-back for Villa at the moment, does have the potential to move out and play at the right-back role. Now that Mings is injured, he's going to be needed inside in the centre-back position, and that means that Matty Cash has his minutes a lot more assured. And although his heat map doesn't look as impressive as some of the other players, and perhaps he doesn't get as far forward as he has done in previous seasons, he is looking slightly more attacking than last year, I would say, where at times he did struggle to get attacking chances when Emery came in to take over at Aston Villa. The fixtures over the next couple don't look too great, to be honest. They've got Liverpool and Chelsea away over the next 4 game weeks. They also face Brighton at home, which is definitely a tricky fixture with the form that De Zerbi's side are in. Even the Crystal Palace fixture, which is a green fixture, is probably still a relatively difficult game. I think Palace have started off to the season really well and are actually looking great, despite the results perhaps not going the way they would have wanted. In terms of the data, Matty Cash did have a very high XG chance in Game Week 1, which is worth noting that with a small sample size is going to make more of a difference to the data here. And that's why his expected FPL points of 4.9 per 90 is way ahead of his actual output of 2.5 per 90. In terms of XG, that's where you can see the chance coming in that he should have scored, to be honest, is probably a positive sign, but it is skewing his data in terms of what's expected versus what you might get as an output every week. But you'd hope if he's going to keep getting those chances, which aren't going to be a weekly occurrence, you'd think, but if he's getting into those kind of attacking positions, I suppose, as someone who doesn't own him already, we can only really see that as a positive, right? And put faith in him that he might finish it if he does get another chance like that down the line. His expected points over the next 3 aren't quite as good as some of the other options here, but I think if you're backing Villa to do well, which they look like they're in good form, just like Brighton, just like Brentford, these kind of teams, if you're looking to get in a defensive asset from them, I think cash has to be the standout option, really, if you're going for one from Villa. And the other team where there's a clear standout option has got to be Spurs. I think at right back, you've got Emerson and Pedro Porro, who have both played 1 game at the moment, so you can't go there. The centre-backs look atrocious. I think Destiny Udogie at left back has to absolutely be your man. Another 4.5 million defender, and one that does have some nicer rotation kind of pairings, I would suggest, than Matty Cash and some other defenders in here do. But we're going to cover all of those in just a second, so make sure you do hang around for that, because I think it's a very interesting strategy to have Chilwell, have Estupinan as your 2 defenders, and then for your 3rd defensive spot, own 2 as your 3rd and 4th defender, but rotate them in and out every week to see who you want starting. You can get some really, really nice fixture runs if you have 2 4.5 million defenders or something like that, and then just have a 4.0 million as Cabore or someone as your 5th defender. So there are plenty of good rotation options, and I think Spurs make up one of those best rotation options. And I think what's important is that some of you guys watching might already own one of these 4.5 million defenders. Maybe it's even Udogie, and you have him in your side already, and if you're looking for another defender to bring in alongside and rotate with him, then I'm going to show you the best rotation planners you can use and have in terms of which defender should you bring in alongside Udogie to rotate in and out every week and have a really nice fixture run over the next however many game weeks it ends up being. They go on for quite a while, some of them. But we can see with Udogie, just comparing his heat map to Matty Cash's, if we remember it from before, he is looking very, very attacking over the first 2 game weeks, and his expected FPL points per 90 looks very nice as well. Some decent XG and XA numbers being put up by him, and 10.5 expected points over the next 3 compared to Matty Cash's, although he does have a much nicer set of fixtures over the next 3 than he does in the 2 game weeks following that, where he takes on Arsenal and Liverpool. But he's still only 2% owned Udogie, so he does look like a really nice option. I'm aware that some of you who commented in my video yesterday definitely did mention that you have Udogie, so that's why I brought up that I'm going to show you guys which defender to bring in alongside each of these picks if maybe you already own one of them in your team and you're looking for another defender who rotates really well. And just like yesterday's video, I will try and respond to every comment down below with all your FPL queries. If you want to get in early and make sure that you've got the best chance of getting a reply, because I tend to be online and reply to the people who comment first if I can, but I think I responded to over 100 comments yesterday, so there's plenty of time for you to get in still. But if you want to have the best chance, make sure to hit that notification bell so that you're notified every time I upload, and then you can just come on and get your question in straight away, maybe even before you watch the video. But do leave a like whilst you're down there, turning notifications on as well. But Udogie has to be your man from Spurs, basically. Not too much more to talk about. I just thought I'd give a little bit of a spoiler for what's to come later in the video to make sure that you guys stick around for that, because I think it's going to be really helpful. But before we get into the rotation tools, we've got Saliba and Zinky Winky to consider, as Ramsdale would call him. But for all of us who don't have an immature sense of humour is, of course, Zinchenko. And the reason that I think this is maybe one of the most promising points of the video is that I preferred Zinchenko from Gabriel from the start of the season. I would have loved to own him if he wasn't injured. I still prefer him to Saliba as well. And one of the reasons for that is actually because if we bring back that data from earlier with Hickey, where he's substituted a hell of a lot of the time, you might have recalled that Zinchenko was the only player to be substituted more, 18 times last season. And every time he was substituted, it was after the period where the clean sheet would be locked in and banked for if Arsenal do concede a late goal, which they have done in the past and could do in the future. And whereas Saliba would still be on the pitch in the 90 plus whatever minute, if that clean sheet does go, then Zinchenko will have been substituted off and have the clean sheet points banked. But that is not the only reason. The data also looks better in terms of Zinchenko. They're very, very even for bonus points down there at the bottom. So when Saliba has his reputation of being a bonus points monster, Zinchenko has also got his fair share. Expected assists and expected goals are both in favour of Zinchenko, and this data is from last season, of course. The expected FPL points per 90 also in favour of Zinchenko. In fact, the only thing that didn't go in Zinchenko's favour was the points they actually got. Per 90, Saliba did outscore him. So although it is rather tight, I still think I prefer Zinchenko as an option in that kind of inverted role that you'd imagine he comes back into. It's unaware whether there might be some rotation with Tomiyasu once he returns from suspension, or however fit Zinchenko is, maybe he might not be able to start week in, week out, especially when European football comes in. But in might be a slight risk that I'm willing to take. Maybe not even this week, maybe a few weeks down the line, I could consider going for Zinchenko. But if you're looking for a Gabriel replacement right now, he's one of the more risky ones, kind of with the Manchester City defenders. It's a little bit more of a risk to go for someone like a Zinchenko at this point without too much information on his performances, but also his return and his integration back into the starting 11. But I thought it was definitely something I wanted to throw out there, because alongside Saliba, there definitely is another option that I myself am actually quite a big fan of. So now I want to get into these rotations and which players you own and who you should get in alongside them. And we're going to be kicking things off with if you already own Henry or a Brentford defender, or you already own Cash or another Villa defensive asset, then I think this is the rotation pairing for you. And I'm considering game week 3 to game week 10, all the way through there, which teams have the best rotations between them. And I think if you own either one of these teams, get in the one from the other team, basically. If you own Henry, then buying Cash should definitely be something you should be considering. If you own Cash, then buying Henry is something you should be considering. But there are Pinnock, there are other defenders from Brentford, as mentioned. You take your pick of the bunch. It doesn't really matter as long as they're just from Brentford and from Villa. But with Villa, I think there was only the one standout in Matty Cash, who I think you should be going for, and that I would personally recommend. So which fixtures do you get over game weeks 3 until game week 10? Well, there are real standout fixtures when you look at this. We've got Burnley away, and you can bench Henry for Crystal Palace at home. So the one with the kind of gradient, bluey-greeny colour is the one where you'd obviously play the player, and the one in grey is the one where you would bench the player. So then in game week 4, you'd start Henry at home to Bournemouth, and you'd bench Matty Cash against Liverpool, and so on. You get to bench fixtures such as Newcastle, Chelsea, Brighton, Man United, and then Chelsea again in game week 10, and you get a lot of nice home fixtures like Bournemouth, Crystal Palace, Everton. You've then got Forest away and Wolves away, before Burnley at home and then Luton at home again in game week 10. So this fixture run looks fantastic. It's no surprise that it was rated top by the Fantasy Football Fix fixture planner and rotation planner. So that's what I've used to kind of look up and research some of these pairings. So if you want to go ahead and use that, I'll always leave a link to their website down below in the description if you want to check it out for yourself, because it is something that I use just by my own accord to research all things FPL in terms of stats. So yeah, this is the rotation pairing for you if you own either one of those, but maybe you don't own a Brentford defender or a Villa defender. Maybe you own someone else. Then what do you do? Well, if you own a Chelsea defender right now, then I think the man that you bring in is a Newcastle defender. Or maybe if you own a Newcastle defender, then you could bring in a Chelsea defender, but just hold your horses on that. If you own a Newcastle defender, keep an open mind for the next slide as well. But if you own someone like a Chilwell or you own a Gusto, I don't think many people will own Gusto right now, but you could consider this rotation pairing right here, where you start your Chelsea defender over the next 3 game weeks, and then as long as you bring in that Newcastle defender in time for game week 6, so you could even bring in Chilwell or Gusto this game week, just bring in one of them, and then making sure you bring in Botman, probably for your other defender, or another defender pick from your back 5 in game week 6. You start him for the next 2 against Sheffield United and Burnley, and then you've got Burnley away for Chelsea in game week 8. Then after that, you've got 2 more game weeks where you can start Botman against Crystal Palace at home, and then Wolves away. So this looks like a little bit of a more kind of split pairing. You've got more flexibility with regards to when you can bring Botman in. It could be in game week 3, it could be in game week 4, it could be in game week 5, or game week 6 is the very latest where you could bring in that Newcastle defender pick. But as long as you have that Chelsea player, whether it's Chilwell or whether it's Gusto, over the next 3 game weeks, this looks like a rotation pairing to maybe go for if you're one of those that don't have the transfers right now to spend them all on the defenders, and maybe you just want to spend the one transfer on a defender pick, Gabriel out to a Chelsea man, and then you've got a few more game weeks to kind of get the rest of your team sorted out before bringing in a Newcastle defender in game week 6. And I'd suggest doing the same kind of thing. Basically, if you own Udogia at the moment, then go for Botman as well in any game week before game week 6 and have that rotation pairing that looks really nice. I think it was FPL Raptor who's actually started with the pair of these guys just in preparation for this rotation plan later on. So if you own a Newcastle defender, you've got a choice to make, basically, between going for Udogie, who has the higher attacking threat and looks better going forward, but to be honest, with Ange, I think they're going to keep fewer clean sheets than Chelsea could end up doing with the likes of Caicedo and Lavia coming in. You can only imagine them getting better defensively, really. So I think that's the decision you've got to make if you own Botman already, but I don't think too many do, to be honest. whether you own Udogie or whether you go for a Chilwell or a Gusto in game week 3 and just hold them basically until game week 6 where you bring in Botman, I think will depend basically on budget. If budget's no option, I'd go Udogie over going for someone like a Chilwell, but if that 0.5 makes a difference, as we talked about in the Chelsea section with going for Gusto, then I think that's a very reasonable thing you can do where you own Gusto. Even if it's just over the next 3 weeks, you could probably play Botman through game week 8 as well, where he has West Ham, and it wouldn't look too bad at all with the Newcastle fixtures from there on out, because we're assuming they're going to be a pretty solid defence. They look very well organised against Manchester City. And I think if you already own a Newcastle defender, you've got a decision to make between Udogie and Gusto. But personally, I really like the look of going for Gusto right now, saving that 1 million that can be spent in the kind of front line. That's because I own Salah in midfield and a lot of my funds are still taken up there. I am struggling to be able to get the cash without removing Salah, which I may well end up doing anyway. But if money's no object, I'd go Udogie. If it is an object, then you need to go for Gusto at 4.0 million. Then I'm definitely not opposed to that as well. The fixture runs look pretty similar. I do just about prefer this one with Udogie, and his attacking threat does make him an exciting pick, which I'm trying to play FPL a bit more exciting this year. But this is definitely a very strong rotation plan that I think FPL Raptor even went for from the start of the season. So that's definitely backing up the fact that it's a good plan. If that man's had these two on his bench in preparation just for this, then you'd have to back up that it's probably a pretty good strategy to have to go for it yourself. And I suppose the last thing I wanted to touch on is with Estupinan's fixtures turning a little bit worse for wear over the next couple of game weeks, is there an argument for actually benching him in favour of some other players? And are there game weeks where I wouldn't be prepared to play Estupinan and I'd rather play 2 other 4.5 million defenders over someone like that? And this is what Fantasy Football Fix recommends. When I put in the kind of 2 for 3 strategy, so you have 3 defenders, you start 2 of them in the back line alongside Ben Chilwell, who's the obvious one, who's kind of unbenchable at the moment, playing as a left winger. This is what it suggests, and it has its doubts for sure, and it definitely has patches in here where I'm like, not sure I'd do that myself. Playing Estupinan against Man United, maybe not. Playing, players like Brentford defenders away at Old Trafford. You can see quite far along there in the Brentford fixtures. There's definitely got to be a better solution, perhaps, but to be honest, when I've looked at the other alternatives, this is the one it recommends as the strongest, and this might not be a perfect strategy, and it's made me kind of think, would I just play Estupinan through these fixtures and back him and his attacking threat and back Brighton to get results, maybe against some tougher teams? And I think the answer to that right now, basically, as you can kind of tell from my tone, is yes. I would play Estupinan in this West Ham game coming up. I'd play him against Newcastle, Man United, which this planner is suggesting to do anyway. The only real game I'd consider going and benching Estupinan is maybe away at the Etihad, but that is in quite a number of game weeks' time, as you can see there towards the end. So personally, not going to overthink it too much. I'm just going to stick with the simple 2 rotation pairing, so having 2 defenders you rotate in and out, always starting Chilwell, always starting Estupinan, and then starting one of these other 2 defenders that I'm looking to own. So I think there's a slight argument for it. Personally, until Brighton fall off in terms of form and Estupinan maybe doesn't look as attacking, he's forced to have more defensive responsibility in matches and isn't creating as many chances, then maybe that's something I'll look into. But personally, right now, I think just play it simple and stick to one of the rotation pairings that we saw before. And so then at the end of this video, I thought I'd put something that maybe half of you have skipped to right now, but the half of you that have watched the entire video, first of all, thank you very much. But here are the rankings that I've put together with Chilwell and Estupinan at the top, kind of in a bracket of their own, but I thought it'd be interesting if maybe some of you wanted to look at how their data compares. They are truly much in a league of their own. Expected FPL points per 90 of over 8, when the next highest in this list is under 6. So really, Chilwell and Estupinan just have to be in your starting 11 right now. I've then gone and kind of picked my favourite or most sensible recommendation from each team other than those 2. But with Chelsea, I have gone with another Chelsea defender because Chilwell, as mentioned, is in that kind of bracket on his own right now. So I've just gone with Pinnock over Henry, which is kind of counterintuitive because I've got Henry in my team at the moment, but I didn't really put too much thought into Pinnock at the start of the season. I think it's so tight between them that if I could have 2 from Brentford, they'd probably both be in here. But Pinnock over Henry, maybe something that looks quite interesting. Something maybe I'm just going off via the eye tests and the vibes right now feel good for Pinnock. Saliba is one where I wish the vibes felt better for Zinchenko, and maybe in a week's time I would have Zinchenko in here instead of Saliba. But right now he looks a safe pick to just tick over points, and at this point in the season maybe it's time not to take as many risks and just to try and look in terms of overall rank for the games that are going to produce the best long-term benefits. We've then got Udodi, who just makes it in over the other Chelsea defenders, so Colwell and Gusto in there as the options to rotate with Botman, who's a little bit further down himself, although he does rank second for defensive fixture difficulty. I just think the priority right now is not to get Botman in, it's a few game weeks down the line where you need to have Botman in, basically, is the case with him. We've then got Matty Cash kind of sandwiched between the two of those pairings there, and then we've got finally Anderson as the 10th pick coming in. So if you're looking for a rogue other team to go for who don't have as nice fixtures, then maybe going for him. But Estupinan's fixtures are the worst of the bunch in 18th in terms of the fixture ranking, but it is worth noting what I said before, I would be willing to play him through some of these tougher fixtures with how Brighton and him in particular are looking right now. So that's going to round off today's video. I hope you guys have found it useful. These graphics took a hell of a long time to make, so if you consider leaving a like down below to show your support and kind of push this video out to the YouTube algorithm and try and help get more eyes on it, to maybe help more people out with their FPL teams. Of course, we're going to be selfish and look at our overall rank in terms of our specific ones and just keep and gatekeep the helpful tools. But yeah, I think it's fair to say sharing is definitely caring, and hopefully this video has been helpful for all of you guys watching. If you're new around here, do of course make sure to subscribe to the FPL Phillips YouTube channel, and hopefully I can catch you in the next one. Make sure to leave your comments down below if you've got any FPL queries or questions regarding your O team. As I mentioned during the video, I will try and get back to as many as I can. But if you want to be the first one to the video to try and have the best chance of getting your questions answered in future, make sure to of course hit the notification bell. So I hope to see you in the next video, and I'll wish you a happy rest of your day. Take care and goodbye.